The night before Christmas in Frosthaven always seemed like a scene from a postcard. The snow blanketed the town in a soft shimmer, and strings of multicolored lights adorned every house, flickering against the dark evening sky. This year, however, something felt different. As the church bells chimed in the distance, marking the early hours of Christmas Eve, the Wilson family gathered at their ancestral home, a grand Victorian house on Elmwood Lane. The family hadn't been together in years. Sarah Wilson, the matriarch, had orchestrated this reunion, determined to recapture the warmth of past holidays. Her daughter, Maggie, had reluctantly returned after avoiding home for nearly a decade. "Tonight, we'll all sit down as a family again," Sarah had said when Maggie arrived that afternoon, her voice tinged with hope. As the evening settled, the doorbell rang. Sarah opened it to find not a guest, but a lone envelope on the doorstep. A crimson wax seal held it shut. She called everyone into the living room, the flickering fire casting elongated shadows on the walls. The note was brief. "This year, you'll all pay for what you've forgotten." Who could have sent this chilling message? And what have the Wilsons forgotten? Share your theories in the comments. The family was unsettled, but brushed it off as a cruel prank. "Teenagers," muttered Thomas Wilson, the stoic father, as he poured himself a drink. Yet Maggie couldn't shake the unease creeping over her. By dinner, the tension began to dissipate, or so they thought. Maggie sat at the long oak table, observing her family. Sarah was fussing over a centerpiece of pine cones and candles, while Thomas discussed mundane topics with Maggie's younger brother, Daniel, and his wife, Elise. The dynamic was fragile. Maggie had always felt like an outsider, and her years away had widened the emotional gap. She noticed how her father avoided meeting her eyes, and how Sarah's cheer seemed forced. Their neighbor, Edward Pritchard, dropped by with a tray of gingerbread cookies. "Thought I'd stop in to wish you all a Merry Christmas," he said, his warm smile not quite reaching his eyes. Edward was friendly, perhaps too friendly. He lingered, chatting about the history of the house and recalling stories of past Christmases. "You know, this house has seen some strange things over the years," he said, before catching himself and changing the subject. "What do you think Edward knows about the house's history? Could it tie into the note? Let us know in the comments." Later that night, as the family gathered in the living room, Maggie noticed faint footprints in the snow just outside the window. They led from the edge of the property to the front porch, but seemed to stop there, with no sign of retreat. "Probably a delivery person," Sarah said when Maggie pointed it out, though her voice betrayed a flicker of doubt. The evening grew quieter, and Maggie excused herself to her childhood bedroom upstairs. She opened the closet to retrieve an extra blanket, only to find a small music box she hadn't seen in years. Its intricate carvings of holly and ivy were unmistakable. It had belonged to her older brother, Nathan, who had passed away one Christmas Eve many years ago. She wound the box hesitantly. The familiar, haunting melody of Greensleeves filled the air. Maggie shivered, unsure whether it was the cold draft or the wave of memories rushing back. Downstairs, an ornament fell from the tree, shattering on the hardwood floor. Sarah jumped at the sound and turned to see the broken shards. "Must have been loose," Thomas said, though he seemed just as startled. By the time Maggie returned, the mood in the room had shifted. The family spoke in hushed tones, each glancing nervously toward the windows as if expecting to see someone, or something, outside. Who left the footprints in the snow? And why would Nathan's music box reappear after all these years? Let us know your thoughts below. As the clock struck midnight, the Wilsons exchanged gifts. Maggie's heart wasn't in it. Her thoughts lingered on the note, the footprints, and the music box. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. "Maybe we should call it a night," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. Sarah nodded, clearly exhausted. But as the family began to retreat to their rooms, Maggie noticed something else. Above the fireplace hung a framed family portrait, taken years ago during the last Christmas Nathan had been alive. Someone had altered the picture. Nathan's face, once smiling, had been scratched out. What would you do if you saw your family portrait defaced like this? Could it be connected to the cryptic note? Share your theories. The night stretched on, thick with unease. As Maggie lay in bed, the music box melody replayed in her head. The snow outside seemed to glow under the moonlight, yet the footprints remained, stark against the otherwise undisturbed blanket of white. Maggie stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. Who had left the note? And why did she feel as though the answers lay buried in memories the family had spent years trying to forget? As the clock ticked into the early hours of Christmas morning, the Wilson house descended into a tense stillness. The cryptic note, and the unnerving discoveries from the previous night lingered in the minds of every family member. Maggie, restless, wandered through the halls, her footsteps soft against the creaking floorboards. In her old bedroom, she noticed something out of place. Resting neatly on her bed was a doll she hadn't seen in decades, a faded porcelain figure with a frayed lace dress. Its glassy eyes seemed to follow her as she hesitantly approached. Maggie's heart raced as she picked it up, the weight of forgotten memories pressing down on her. This doll had been hers, but she couldn't recall how it had disappeared, or why it had returned now. Downstairs, Thomas's voice rose in frustration. "Who's playing games here?" he demanded, holding up an old, tarnished locket that once belonged to Sarah. He had found it dangling from the Christmas tree, a place it hadn't been before. The tension grew as Sarah defended herself, claiming she hadn't touched it. "What do you think the significance of these items is? Could they hold a key to unraveling the past? Share your thoughts in the comments." The family began to argue, each accusing the other of planting the strange items. Daniel insisted it was Maggie's way of getting attention after years away, while Sarah claimed it could be Edward, their neighbor, playing tricks. Maggie, however, couldn't shake the feeling that these objects were meant for her, deliberate reminders of something she couldn't yet recall. As the voices grew louder, the wind outside picked up, howling against the windows. A sudden crack of thunder silenced the room, and within moments, the house was plunged into darkness. What would you do if the power went out at this exact moment? Could this be more than just a coincidence? Let us know below. Flashlights and candles became their only sources of light. Shadows danced on the walls, amplifying the unease. Maggie retreated to the attic, her flashlight beam cutting through the dust-filled air. She had an overwhelming urge to find something, though she wasn't sure what. Amidst the forgotten boxes and old furniture, she stumbled upon a stack of letters tied with a fraying ribbon. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink faint but legible. As she read the first few lines, Maggie's breath caught. The letters were addressed to her parents, written by someone named Evan, a name that struck a chord deep within her memory. Evan had been a relative, though scarcely mentioned in family conversations. The letters painted a picture of estrangement, desperation, and heartbreak. They spoke of a family conflict during a Christmas long ago, culminating in an event that led to Evan's disappearance. The final letter was the most chilling. "You've turned your backs on me, but I will never forget what you've done." Maggie returned to the living room, clutching the letters. "Do you want to explain this?" she asked, her voice trembling. The room fell silent as she spread the letters on the coffee table. Thomas and Sarah exchanged uneasy glances, and Sarah began to cry. "We thought it was behind us," she whispered. "We thought it was over." As the family pressed for answers, Sarah revealed the truth. Many Christmases ago, an accident had occurred during a heated argument. Evan, misunderstood and blamed for far more than his share, had been cast out of the house. They had assumed he'd left for good, but the guilt had never truly faded. Do you think Evan's return is justified, or is he taking things too far? Share your perspective in the comments. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, startling everyone. A gaunt figure stepped into the light of the fireplace, a man with hollow cheeks and piercing eyes that burned with intensity. It was Evan. He carried the weight of years spent in isolation, his voice strained but firm. "I didn't come here to hurt anyone," he said, though his presence alone was enough to freeze the room. "I just want the truth." Maggie stepped forward. "Why now?" she asked, her voice breaking. Evan's gaze softened as he looked at her. "Because I couldn't let another Christmas pass with lies holding this family together." He dropped a torn photograph on the table. It showed the Wilsons on Christmas morning years ago, Evan's image torn out, but his shadow still visible in the background. Thomas, for the first time, broke his stoic facade. "We failed you," he admitted. "But what do you want from us now?" Evan's expression hardened again. "A confession, an acknowledgement of what you did." His voice wavered. "Or none of you will know peace. If you were in Evan's position, would you forgive, or would you demand justice? Share your opinion below." The family sat in stunned silence, the storm raging outside mirroring the turmoil within. Maggie's mind raced as she tried to piece together the full story. The answers lay somewhere between the guilt in her parents' eyes and the determination in Evan's. The Wilson family sat in silence, the tension in the room almost suffocating. The truth was out now, spoken in broken confessions and stifled sobs. Evan stood across from them, his thin frame shadowed by the flickering firelight. The storm outside had calmed, but within the house, the damage was done. Thomas leaned forward, his voice a rasp. "We were wrong. We didn't protect you. We blamed you when we should have been helping you." His words hung heavy in the air, weighed down by years of guilt. Evan's face, etched with pain, didn't soften. "An apology won't erase what I've endured. But maybe it's enough to stop this." His hand trembled as he placed the torn photograph back on the table. He turned to the door, pausing for a moment as if considering whether to say more. Then, without another word, he disappeared into the night, leaving only the sound of his retreating footsteps crunching against the snow. Do you think the family's confession was enough to make amends? Or does Evan deserve more justice? Share your thoughts below. Maggie remained seated long after the others had gone to bed. The fire had burned down to embers, casting faint shadows that flickered across the walls. She couldn't stop replaying Evan's words in her mind. His pain had been real, his torment raw, but there was something unresolved that she couldn't place. As the first light of dawn seeped through the windows, she rose to tidy the scattered papers on the table. Her hand froze when she saw it, a single envelope resting neatly atop the stack. It hadn't been there before. Her name was scrawled across it in unfamiliar handwriting. Slowly, she opened the card, her breath catching as she read the message inside. "You're next." Her fingers tightened around the card as a faint sound echoed from the hall, a whisper so soft it could have been the wind. But Maggie knew better. What do you think the final message means? Could Evan still be watching, or is there more to this story? Let us know your theories in the comments. The house remained quiet, bathed in an unsettling stillness. The final frame lingers on Maggie's face, her eyes wide with uncertainty. Then, faint and almost imperceptible, a chilling whisper. "Maggie, if this story sent shivers down your spine, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more chilling tales. Don't forget to share your theories about the ending in the comments below. What do you think will happen next? And if you're ready for another scare, click here to watch our next horror story. You won't want to miss it.